Hi, I'm April Tatro, and I played Isis the cat on the first generation of Star Trek, and I'm here today on Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. This week's guest on the show is easily one of the most unique guests I've ever had on this podcast, quite possibly the most unique one ever I've interviewed, period, I think. And that's saying a lot, because I've talked to some pretty unique guests out there who've had some very interesting professions that have somehow linked into the world of Star Trek. But never have I ever interviewed somebody who was a contortionist. And April Tatro completely gets that mark, because April is a contortionist and a dancer, and one of the world's most famous flexible people out there. April's Star Trek connection comes to us through the original series Season 2 finale, Assignment Earth. Yeah, that's the episode that was meant to be a backdoor pilot to a completely different show that never got off the ground, and there's quite a story around that one. And just to make sure you're not confusing who the characters are, no, she's not the person who Terry Gar was, because, well, that person was played by Terry Gar. April was in fact the humanoid version of Isis the cat. And her appearance was actually uncredited on the original series, as we're going to learn today. It was a very brief scene that happens at the very end of the episode Assignment Earth, but it's a pretty big one and it left quite a mark on a lot of people. But the one thing it didn't leave was a name in the credits. And as we're going to learn today, it was thanks to Larry Nemecek, a former guest of this show, that we eventually found out it was April who played that very, very interesting cat person. But Star Trek was just a little tiny piece of April's career, and it really goes far beyond that. Because her dancing and flexibility brought her to Vegas to do various talk shows to show off her contortion skills, and appearances in a lot of other shows and movies that we're going to talk about today. April is one of those truly fascinating guests because her stories are so vastly different from everybody else we've talked to, because her career path was so incredibly different than anybody else we've talked to. So I can now check off talking to the world's most famous frontbender from my bucket list of things to do on this podcast, and I think that's a pretty cool thing to check off. So I hope you'll enjoy this very interesting, very surprising, very fun interview with April Tatro. And by the way, just a quick warning also before we get into things here, I do want to mention that April had a little bit of problems with her web camera, so for anybody who's out there watching the video version of this podcast today, you're going to see that it's very much out of focus, and there was nothing we could do about it. We spent quite some time trying to troubleshoot it and getting it to work. Couldn't quite figure it out, so we just made the decision to just kind of go with it as it is. So unfortunately, she's going to look a little bit fuzzy, but I hope it's not too big of a deal for you guys out there, because there's still so much great content, so much interesting stories from her, that I don't think it's really going to take away anything from this episode, other than maybe making your eyes a little bit fuzzy. But before we start talking to this week's guest, I want to remind you guys to make sure you are following Trek Untold on all forms of social media. You can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Trek Untold, and that's one word, Trek Untold, no spaces in between. That's the best way to stay up to date on who our guests are for the week, learn all about them before the show begins, and check out all the random memes I post, because yeah, I do a lot of that too. If you're in a position to financially support the show, please consider becoming a Patreon member. Head over to patreon.com/trekuntold to see all the different ways you can help financially at different contribution levels. Some of the perks include early access to the episodes, having the chance to ask guests questions, and hopefully some more stuff that I'm going to figure out pretty soon. It is easily the best way to directly connect with me, as well as to meet other fans of this show. If you're looking to buy some Trek Untold merchandise, don't worry, that's going to be coming very soon. If you prefer to check out the video version of this podcast, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where every Sunday I post these episodes in video format, which includes a lot of images and video from the guests that we're talking to. But the most important thing you can do to help support this show is please leave us ratings and reviews if you're checking us out on iTunes, on Spotify, or other audio platforms that allow you to leave reviews and ratings, or by subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as giving our Trek Untold videos thumbs up, likes, and comments. All these interactions help push our podcast to the very top of these different platforms to make sure more Star Trek fans can find us. It costs you nothing to do other than a few moments of your time, so please, if you haven't done that already, consider doing so. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold, and now joining me on the other side of the screen, she is the country's most famous frontbender, she is the human pretzel. We are joined today by a person who I hope isn't too salty, Miss April Tatro. April, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here. We got a lot to talk about, and you are certainly a one-of-a-kind guest here, because I can't say I've ever talked to any contortionists on this show before, so I have a lot of questions.
Okay, that's fine.
So yeah, normally I like to start this podcast with what your earliest memory of Star Trek was, but you were on the original series, so we're going to come back to that in a little bit. So I want to start with the secret origin story of April. So I'd love to hear a little bit about where you grew up, who your parents were, and what little April wanted to be when she grew up.
Okay, I was born in Astoria, Oregon. My parents moved to Escondido when I was San Diego, actually, when I was 3. When I was 9, they moved me to Escondido, and I had very large feet and a small body. My feet grew faster than my body did, so my mother decided to put me in ballet. And she found a teacher that was had been one of the Goldwyn girls in movies, way back when. And she saw I had a natural ability, so she gave me. I took tap, ballet, jazz, all that, and she saw that I had a natural ability, and so she gave me free acrobatic lessons. So I became an acrobatic dancer, and then she saw that I had limberness. So this dance school was in a church, and there were bats, actual bats, in the belfry. We could hear them. But the church had, you know how the church have an altar?
Yep.
It's a step up.
Yep.
And so there was a step up, so she'd put a mat down on the ground, and then she'd turn me on my side and she'd stretch me. So each time she'd behind the head, so each time she'd stretch me, she'd pull my leg further, 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 further until it would come over, and then further, further, further down. So it finally was called an oversplit, where she would stretch me further each time. I mean, she just said I was very limber. She never used the word contortionist. She called me an acrobat, basically. I don't know what that was. Anyway, she called me an acrobat. And so I did acrobatic dancing, and I learned at a very young age, 9 years of age, I think I decided I wanted to become a professional dancer. So instead of going over to the Coke stand and having Cokes after school and all that and hanging out with the gang all through high school, I went to the studio and I practiced and worked out. So when I was right out of high school at 18, and during high school, I found an agent, and from the age of 16, I got paid to perform at like Camp Pendleton or an Elks Club, or there was a salary involved, and I got paid to do that. So I guess you could say I became semi-professional when I was like 16. But then when I was 18, my mother drove me up to LA. She saw this teacher, Georgia Copeland was her name. She saw that an article in Variety that George Morrow Dancers was looking for a specialty dancer. And so my mother and Georgia drove me up to LA, and I auditioned for George Morrow, and I got the job. So it was my dad and my mother had a big argument when we got home, because my dad said, "You're sending our child to across the country, and how could you do that?" I'd never been away from home. I'd never been to camp or anything. I'd never been on a plane. And all I knew were, Escondido. And so my dad bought the ticket. I got on the plane. That's a whole nother story. The plane got lost in a snowstorm. Then I had to get on a bus. And I found Boston. And we went into rehearsals. And I roomed with 3 other girls. And they were from Cincinnati, Ohio. So I met people, I didn't know what I was doing. I lived on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because we lived in a rooming house. There was no stove or anything. And so I worked with George Morrow Dancers for quite a while, for a couple months, I guess. And I was the lead dancer. And I came out and I did a routine, and we were a warm-up act for Milton Berle. Milton Berle was the star of the show. So that's really basically how I got started as a dancer. It wasn't until I worked in Las Vegas, where the girls in Las Vegas would say, "April, do something funny." I was like a dancer at the Sands Hotel. I was Copa Girl. We worked with the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, the whole group. Anyway, so the girls backstage would say, "Oh, you're funny, funny, funny," ha ha ha. Well, after Las Vegas, I went to Miami, I went to Montreal. I worked for different producers, but I was always extremely limber, and they would tell me to hold my leg down rather than kick it higher. They would always say, "April, leg down, lower, lower, stay with the other girls." And I finally got tired of that. I decided to come home, back to Escondido, and I worked up a little act doing contortion, and did. Some of your listeners are probably, I don't know how old, but anyway, there was a guy by the name of Jack LaLanne who did exercises on TV.
Yep.
And I've been on his show. He had me on his show one time. So I worked up a whole act where the comedian at Disneyland, I also was a can-can dancer at Disneyland for 2 years at the Golden Horseshoe Review. And he saw me stretching backstage, and he said, "You know what? You're a contortionist." And I said, "What?" He said, "You're a contortionist." He said, "So I'm going to work up this act." And he said, "I'm going to be Jack LaLanne, and you're going to be the woman with the rollers and the hairnet in her hair trying to follow the TV. And I'm going to say, okay, ladies, higher at the leg." And he said, "Then you get the leg caught behind the neck, and then you, oh my gosh, and then you try to get out of it." And he said, "We're going to have a comedy routine." So Wally Bogue and I did that for the whole 2 years I worked at Disneyland. I did the can during the day with the kicks and all that. And at night, I worked with Wally at club dates. And so when I was ready to leave Disneyland and go to Vegas, he put the routine on a tape for me. Because I figured one day I'm not going to want to work with everybody. I'm going to want to specialize. So that's how I had the tape, and that's how I ended up doing, when I finished with all the shows, and I got tired of that. I wanted to go back to college, actually.
So, yeah, so I got to ask, I mean, you're doing so many different things here, and I feel like we just glossed over the fact that you're hanging out with the Rat Pack or working for the Rat Pack and Milton Berle, and this is basically your introduction to the world of entertainment. Now, this is a pretty big cry from where you were from. So, I
Exactly.
mean, you got to have some big stories here. I mean, I'd love to hear if you have any memories of Milton, of the Rat Pack. I mean, did you get to cross over much and interact with these folks?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I did. Milton Berle was, he always wanted the attention, and I don't blame him. He was the star. The Rat Pack, Sammy Davis was wonderful, sweet man, very sweet man. He had a party one night, and he invited us all up for the party. And one of the girls was tall, really tall, and she spilled some punch or something all over her white pants. He said, "Just go into my closet, pick out a pair of pants, and put them on." So she came out with his pants on, and she was tall, and they came up to like her knees. I mean, but he was a very nice, sweet man. And Dean Martin was like a teddy bear. He was lovely. I liked him a lot. They would choose certain girls out of the Sands, the Copa girls, and they'd invite a few of us each night to go out to dinner. So I was one of the girls who was was chosen to go out to dinner with them. So yeah, a lot of stories, a lot of experiences, a lot of there's so many that we run out of time.
I mean, any chance I get to have talked to somebody who's been around Milton Berle, I'm always curious to hear about, and especially not just because of the rumors. I'm sure you've heard about him as well, but I
Yeah.
won't touch that one.
Okay. Oh yeah. No, I don't want to say anything negative about anybody. And he was. I mean, I didn't know him. I only worked. I was the lead dancer. He didn't really want much to do with the dancers. As I said, he was the light had to be just right. And when we were on stage with him, he said, "No light on the girls, no light on the girls, light on me."
Hmm.
So, and yeah, that's my memories of Milton Berle. And when I was growing up, he was Uncle Milty because I used to love him. I watched his shows all the time, so it was quite interesting that I was able to work with him
Yeah, absolutely.
after I had been such a fan. When you work with someone, you just get to know them much better.
Right, yeah. So we're back now to you've come home and you want to pursue a college education. So what are you thinking about? I mean, you're going from dancing and starting to learn about acrobatics, that thing as professional. Now you want to go to college. So what are you looking towards as a profession?
Um, well, I wanted to teach children who were blind dance, and that was my main goal. But then I was there, and then a couple of my girlfriends from Vegas have moved to Los Angeles. And they said, April, you need to come up to Los Angeles because this is where all the action is. And so I moved in with two of the girls that I roomed with in Vegas. And I came up to LA. I registered, I went to Los Angeles Valley College and I took acting and pantomime. And I went to school at night up here, and I did extra work during the day. I didn't like the extra work because it was really, really boring.
Yep.
Then I got an agent. I got my agent, Coralie Jr. She was for specialty acts. And I couldn't get into Screen Actors Guild unless I had a job. And I couldn't get a job unless I was a member of Screen Actors Guild. So actually how I got in, Coralie got me in as a contortionist because there were no other contortionists in LA. And so at that time, I mean that at that time, I didn't realize it. I was still in my 20s, and I didn't realize that I had this unique ability. I knew I could kick high and get my leg. I knew I could do that, but I wasn't aware of the fact that I was the only one. And so in Europe, they had like way back when, I found out later that I had a fan club. I had no idea. And so through Coralie, I got on Johnny Carson. I was on Johnny Carson like 6 or 7 times. They got so that I didn't have to audition, which was fabulous because they said, we need a contortionist. April, go to April. She could do it. And so I got into Screen Actors Guild. And through Screen Actors Guild, I got into AFTRA, the union AFTRA, and I just started working like that. And then when I started doing more specialty with the contortion, of course, I got more work. So, I mean, it was great because I didn't have any competition. Now there's Circus du Soleil and there's all kinds of, but at that time I was like one of a kind.
Yeah, it's a pretty rare thing I think back then to be like having that kind of a platform, that kind of a spotlight on yourself. So one of the things I wanted to actually ask you about was unrelated to Star Trek. There's a few other things here, and one of those is I know you did an episode of Wonder Woman, and that episode was called Beauty Parade. So I would love to hear what was your experience in that set because I think I haven't talked to a ton of folks who have been on Wonder Woman, but that's a fun show to be on, I'd imagine.
It was very fun. Linda Carter was really nice, and she was very tall, very beautiful.
She as tall as you though? I mean,
Taller,
wow.
taller than me. I'm 5 foot. I thought I was 5'4", but I might have shrunk. Now I'm measured at the doctor's office at 5'3", and she probably was about 5'7".
Hmm.
And she, I guess she had been a beauty queen, but it was a good experience because they treated us very well. And of course, I got hired because they wanted me to be, I forget who I was, Betty Sue or Betty Lou or something like that. And they showed me doing dancing and kicking high and doing acrobats. It was no contortion, but it was walkovers and dancing, basically, kicks and doing some jazz movements. And so they kept flipping back to me for the talent part of the beauty contest. I was the only one they showed that was talent. So that was really a fun thing to work on because it wasn't a lot of sitting around. It was 8 hours of actually moving and doing, because they kept cutting, then they'd cut, and then they'd have me come back and do it again. And so at least I got to move. I was always active. I mean, like when I was in Vegas and I was a Copa girl at the Sands, I didn't like, it was so simple because we do 2 shows a night. We introduced whoever was on. Red Skelton worked there. Barbara Streisand was there. She was just starting out then, and we never even knew who she was. And we heard her voice. We were backstage, and we thought, oh, I forget, she was the opening act for somebody. And I said, oh my goodness, listen to that voice.
It's funny to think of at any point in history that Barbara Streisand would open for someone, you know?
Oh no, she was the opening act. I mean,
Wow.
this was back, let's see, I was at Disneyland from 62 to 64. I was in Vegas in 1965, 66. And back in those days, Vegas, all it consisted of was the Strip and downtown. And every night, all of the hotels were dark, which meant we didn't have shows. And they would open up one hotel and show movies for all the people that worked there. So it was like a small town atmosphere when I was there.
So, like, as you're coming up in this world of entertainment here, I mean, you're talking about doing live performances in Vegas, and you're also now on TV. But I got to ask, as someone who, I guess, initially was kind of more interested in the stage performing, what did you like better? Or I should add also, did you miss the fact that you didn't have an audience to respond to when you were doing TV shows? I mean, was there one that you preferred over the other?
Well, I'll move on because what I preferred more was having, I did trade shows.
Yeah.
I did a lot. For 18 years, I performed at trade shows. And this was pretty much after the stage career. And then I was still doing TV and movie work while I was doing the trade shows. But the trade shows, I didn't have an agent for that. I was my own agent. I didn't have, to pay anybody a commission because they were coming to me directly. And the trade shows were the best because the audience was right in front of me.
Okay.
They were out there and there were no lights. And I could interact with the people. I could look at somebody and say, look at this product, and you don't have to worry about, getting all tied up in knots when you use this product. You don't have to bend over backwards. The directions are really easy. And, so I wrote it was my whole thing because I wrote, choreographed, narrated the script on a little stage. And people lined up like, I did a show like every 30 minutes.
Wow.
So they would start, one crowd would leave and another one would come, and then people would come up and say, oh, shake my hand. And so I was more involved with the audience when I did trade shows.
So you really just like having like no barrier basically between you and the audience. You want that immediate interaction.
Right, no barrier, nothing. And I did that for 18 years.
Oh.
So the trade shows were a longer career than the stage work or the TV or the television or movie work.
Well, I do have one other TV show, and I know we're kind of jumping around in the timeline of your life here, but there's one other TV show that I've been a big fan of, and that's Family Matters. And I saw your clip. In fact, I saw the episode that you did of Family Matters, which is a really fun episode. And you're basically there where Carl and Urkel basically go into an alternate timeline, and it's a world where Carl is rich, and you are there because you are a living statue. You're a living piece of art that's constantly moving. So
Right.
I would love to hear about working on that show, and also if you have any memories of Jaleel White or Reginald VelJohnson.
No, because basically on that show, they had me in my trailer.
Yeah.
And they would just call me out when they needed me. And in those days too, when I did a television show, I would go back to the trailer and study because I was going to college at night.
Oh, okay.
So, and on the television shows and even the movie industry, it's a lot of sitting around. And they're doing their thing, you're doing your thing. So I would say on all the TV shows, I interacted more with the individuals that were on the show on Wonder Woman. But on like that one, they just called me in when they wanted me to be the living statue. And then they would have me go back.
One thing I am definitely curious about here, and I'm surprised it's taken me this long to ask you, but I would love to know what your stretching routine was back then, and even today, what you're doing today. Like, what kind of routine do you have? What kind of exercises do you do to get your body and also maintain your body to have this elasticity?
A lot of stretch. Somebody put it online. Forget who it was. It came. I was teaching at Pierce College, and he came and took pictures of me stretching in my routine. And I guess it's on. My son called me and said, "Mom, do you know you're all over the internet, the YouTube, whatever?" I had no idea, and I don't know who put it on, but because I'm of the age that I'm not really tech. I didn't grow up with a computer. I didn't grow up tech. So, and to be honest with you, a lot of the things I did to make a living. I mean, it was a job for me. It wasn't something that you thought, oh, this will be a lot of fun. It was a job. My agent would call and I'd say, how much am I going to make? You know, how much, what are they paying? Because I had a son. I raised my son by myself with what I made performing. So basically it was a matter of, you know, a lot of actors are like that, you know, it's a business, it's show business, but it's a business like an accounting job or whatever. You get paid for what you produce. So a lot of it was calling me, telling me this was, well, it was like Star Trek. Central Casting called me, told me to show up at, I think it was Paramount or wherever it was, and told me just, you know, you're going there. And it was when I was doing extra work. So 50 some years ago, right? So I said, well, what do I get paid? Well, you're going to get specialty pay because they're going to make a special costume for you. But they like, you know, the way you're built. So therefore they chose you because, you know, they pretty much glued the costume on me. So anyway, so I mean, it was kind of about, oh, good, I have work, because if you didn't work, you didn't get paid. If you didn't get paid, guess what? You couldn't pay your rent or your telephone bill or buy your groceries.
Trek Untold will return momentarily. Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. If you're a Star Trek cosplayer looking for props, or a toy collector looking to spice up your shelves, Triple Fiction Productions has you covered. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. You can expect the same amount of care and attention to detail in any of the items in their catalog, whether it's a prop replica for use in a fan film, or a part of a cosplay, or accessories and playsets for figures from Playmates, Migos, or Diamond Select. Own your very own tricorder or phaser rifle with working lights, the bridge of the Enterprise E for your Playmates figures, or any other item from countless species and ships from the Star Trek universe. All products are 3D printed in the USA and are constantly evolving and improving based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit them at triple-fictionproductions.net or on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hi, I'm Armin Shimmerman.
And I'm Kitty Swink. 17 years ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I didn't know it at the time, but I had a 4% chance of surviving 5 years.
As her husband, I was very scared.
But he never let me see that. You are a rock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pancreatic cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related deaths in the United States, with a 5-year survival rate of just 10%.
We want it to be much higher.
Much higher. It's 6% better when I was diagnosed, but not high enough. More than 60,000 Americans are estimated to be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2021. and more than 48,000 will die from the disease. Because symptoms are often vague, it can be hard to detect.
Like the rest of the world, the Star Trek universe has been struck repeatedly by pancreatic cancer. Not only those of us that work on the show, but our fans around the world as well. It is why we came together with so many others to work with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, the leading patient advocates committed to fighting the world's toughest cancer.
PanCan is working hard to create better outcomes for this devastating disease through its groundbreaking research in early detection and better treatment options.
PanCan drives progress by funding life-saving research, providing personalized patient services, and creating a community of supporters and volunteers who will stop at nothing to create a world in which all pancreatic cancer patients will thrive.
You can help support their important mission by donating at pancan.org today. We donated. Won't you do so too?
Please, make it so.
We now return to Trek Untold.
All right, well, so April, since you just brought up Star Trek, I think we gotta go right into it now, because there's a lot of questions here about this, and for quite some time too, folks weren't even sure who played this character. So we're gonna come back to that, but you just mentioned basically how you got that part for Star Trek, and that was because you essentially got called in because of your talents, right?
I got called in because they liked the way I looked. It had nothing to do with contortion.
Okay, so just purely just based on a headshot photo kind of thing.
Yeah, the headshot, and they saw my, the way I was built, because they wanted that shape for the cat.
Mm-hmm.
Because they basically took a yoke, a velvet piece of material, and just glued it around me, from my neck down over my breasts. So, and then they gave me a pair of silver stockings to put on, and then they basically, the skirt I wore was just a piece of material that they glued together.
I mean, how was that outfit to wear? I mean, was it comfortable? Did you feel okay in that?
Well, yeah, it was, kind of like wearing a glove or something glued on you.
A very thin glove.
Yeah, and then they worked on my, the eyes and the makeup, of course, and the wig. So the front of my hair was my own hair. It was bangs, but they put a wig on, blonde.
I had heard, I think, in another interview that you did, that you talked about just kind of how uncomfortable the costume fitting session was. Do you recall that?
Oh yes, I had to stand quite a while they glued and they pulled and they put it back on, and and then the eyelash, the makeup took a long time because they glued these eyelashes on me that went clear up, and they were kind of uncomfortable. They were heavy. They were heavy on my eyelids. But as I said, I just did what they told me to do, and when they told me to sit, okay, and they told me to walk across the room, okay. I mean, it was, that particular job was not Screen Actors Guild, it was Screen Extras Guild. So it was not, at that point, I guess, it was when I was going to college, as I said, and trying to study, when I was between shoots or whatever.
And we should add, too, for the folks who are watching this video version right now, we're talking about Isis the cat as a human, but right now behind you is your cat hanging out. So we've got a cat visitor with us.
Oh, oh yeah, he's, that's Claude. Clawed.
Of course.
And Claude is black. And that was nothing that was intended.
It just worked out that way today.
Claude was a stray, and he came out from under the bushes and decided he liked my dog, sniffed my dog. A very unusual cat at a neighbor's house, so I actually inherited Claude. He chose me.
Huh.
And when I did the first Star Trek signing, they said, you should bring Claude to the show. I said, no, I'm not going to do that to Claude. He would be too upsetting to him. He was an outside stray when I got him. It was quite a coincidence that he's black.
It is. So, yeah, well, thank you, Claude, for joining us today. We appreciate you being here, too.
See him?
Yeah, there he is. He's hanging out with us.
He's looking out the window.
So the episode that you did, which is Assignment Earth, it's basically a backdoor pilot to what was essentially going to be another show by Gene Roddenberry. So, we're mentioning the man that they called the Great Bird of the Galaxy, the Great Bird of the Universe. Did you get to really interact at all with Gene Roddenberry? Did you even meet him?
I never met him. as I said, it was just an extra part. They called me in, they put the costume on. I didn't think anything about it. It was like a split second in my life. I know more about Star Trek now than I ever knew back then. I didn't even watch Star Trek. Now I've watched it. It's a wonderful show. I wish I would have watched it back then, but I never did. I was so busy just trying to, make a living and go to college. So, it was quite interesting when I got a call from Larry Nemecek, and he asked me if I played. He told me that they went into the records and saw the casting call. And they saw my name. That's how they found out who I was. And I just never paid any attention. I had someone call me about 5 years ago, whatever, and say, they think somebody else did Star Trek. Didn't you do it? And I said, well, yeah, I did. I mean, it wasn't that big a deal. And they said, they're saying somebody else was ISIS. And I said, well, what difference does it make, really? I mean, really, what difference does it make? Let them think it's, well, you should correct it. And I said, I don't even know how to correct it. So then they called me, and it's been wonderful. Because I've gone to about 3 shows, and I've signed my name, and the people are so wonderful and genuine and down to earth. It's really quite nice.
Yeah, we got to give a shout out to Larry. He's been a guest on this show as well. He's done so much for Star Trek and for Star Trek history, and I'm glad he found you, because I was going to ask you how it felt to know, for this many years, no one knew it was actually you playing this part, and there was someone else taking credit for it. So, I mean, that didn't really bother you, though. That's kind of interesting to hear.
Well, she didn't really take credit. I met her at a convention, and she said it wasn't me. She said, look, she has blue eyes, I have brown eyes. She said, it wasn't me.
So it's just the internet basically got it wrong, it sounds like.
Exactly. So,
which happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what can you call about being back on set now? Let's talk about that. William Shatner is there, Leonard Nimoy is there. You've also got Robert Lansing as Gary Seven, and in a rare appearance, you got Terry Garr on a Star Trek show. So what can you remember? I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to really spend much time with him, because again, you were an extra, so it's probably not going to be as heavy duty. But
I didn't really spend. I said hi to Terry. I knew that my agent had represented her years before she got famous, and because Coralie knew Terry Garr's parents, she told me, and she said, then she, of course, went with a bigger agent, whatever. But I just, said hi and how are you? That's pretty much it. And it's been so long ago, I don't even remember how Bill Shatner got my phone number, but, I ended up going to lunch with him.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, but I was engaged and I was going to get married in 2 weeks.
That's a different story.
But I didn't tell him that. And, but he called me and asked me to go to lunch. And he was so handsome and so polite and nice that I did go to lunch with him, and I kind of felt a little guilty because I was engaged, and actually during that whole thing I was planning a wedding when I got called to go do Star Trek. And so I went and I did it, and then I met him, and then he asked me to lunch, and then I went to lunch, and I thought, why am I getting married? He's really cute. Maybe I could cancel the marriage, but all the invitations were out, so I couldn't really do that. So, but then he did call my house after I was married, and asked for me, and my husband answered the phone, because by this time it was only about a couple weeks past. But after my husband and I got married, I got a job to go to, it was directly after, 2 days after our marriage, I flew to Hawaii and was performing there for the police association. And so my husband was home, and he answered the phone, and William Shatner said, who's this? And he said, this is her husband. My husband said, who's this? He said, William Shatner. And so they both hung up. When I got home, my husband said, why is William Shatner calling you? And I said, oh, he probably just wanted to ask me if I could do another job or whatever. But it was kind of embarrassing.
It's definitely embarrassing. I know back then, but today I don't mean to be horrible, but it's kind of funny to think about it today.
Yeah, today it is, but I felt kind of, I mean, after that happened, and I told Larry this when he interviewed me on his blog, I was at a restaurant, and this was 50 years later. It was before Larry called me about doing, if I was Isis, the cat. I went with a bunch of girlfriends to this local restaurant here in Studio City that you go to happy hour. It's a wonderful restaurant. Anyway, we went to this restaurant, and Bill Shatner walks in and sits at one of the booths. I think he was waiting for his family. And my girlfriend said, April, didn't you work with William? Look at his William Shatner. I'm going to go talk to him and tell him you're here. I said, please don't. Please don't do that. I said, don't do that. I said, it's if you're a star, somebody really that everybody recognizes, you don't want a bunch of people coming up and talking to you. I said, please don't do that. She said, no, I'm going to go do that. So she walked over and started talking to him, and he was, very kind, very nice. I thought, oh, gee. So I walked over and I said, Bill, I'm April. I know you don't remember me, but I was on one of the episodes. I was the cat. He acted like he remembered me. I said, I just want to apologize to you because I said, I know you don't remember, but after I was on the show, you invited me to lunch. I went to lunch. Then you called the house, and I was married. And I said, I didn't want you to think that I was one of those wanton women. I wasn't married when I went to lunch with you. And he just laughed. He thought it was very funny. So at least I got it. Then I got my girlfriend away from him. I dragged her back to the table.
So at least there is a conclusion to the William Shatner drama, though, so that's good to hear.
Exactly.
I know you don't want to necessarily talk anything negative about anybody, but I heard that on that episode of Star Trek that you did, Terry Garr had like a very terrible experience on it, so much so that she didn't want to even talk about Star Trek or acknowledge that she did Star Trek. So I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you remember seeing anything or anything like that. Do you remember seeing anything happen on set?
No, nothing. Nothing. I don't. I mean, I'm totally innocent. No, don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, had no idea. I didn't even have any idea that was the case.
And just for the sake of historical record keeping here, do you remember how long your shoot was? Were you there for one day or was it a multiple day shoot?
Oh, no, I was there only one day. I think
Okay.
it was like an 8-hour day. I think I got paid like $60-some and lunch. That was it.
And there's no such thing as a free lunch in Hollywood.
No, and I just went and did my job, did what they told me, and came home and continued to, to plan my wedding, whatever.
Well, I think the most important question about Star Trek is, did you and the actual cat Isis get along? Did you get a chance to actually meet that little black cat?
No, never saw a cat at all.
Never? Wow.
No, they did, they shoot separate scenes. And so when I was there, it was pretty much just the parts I had with Terry. When I looked at her, she looked at me. And it was a pretty easy day, actually. It was a very easy day.
Now, I've always wondered, again, this goes back to the mystery of trying to figure out who played that character. But do you know why you were left off of the credits? Is that just because you were an extra and they considered you not part of it?
Exactly. I was an extra. And they don't really, they don't name extras. They don't, you're not part of the shows I've done where I had an actual part. At the end, they give the credits and they'll say such and such played such and such. But if you're an extra, you're really pretty much, you're considered atmosphere. I think today they don't even call them extras. I'm not sure because I haven't been working for a long time. But I think that now they call them atmosphere. And now the 2 years ago, the two unions merged. So now it's Screen Actors Guild and Screen Extras. They've merged together.
So it wasn't like any bad feelings or anything. That was just that you're an extra and that's why you weren't given the credit.
Right. No, yeah, it was. And that's why it didn't even occur to me that Star Trek would become so popular, become like a whole thing.
Yeah.
Because I went, I did the job, it was over, done, and I left. I got my money, got my check, and pretty much that was it. I mean, that was such a small part of what I did.
Yeah. It's kind of fun though, because Star Trek fans, they're into that kind of thing. I mean, they want to know who everybody is, and so I'm glad that we were able to solve that mystery.
Yeah, and it was fun. It's become actually, I've made more than I would have ever made if I was doing it under Screen Actors Guild, because see, Screen Actors Guild, you get residuals every time they show something. With an extra, you don't get residuals. You just go, you get your pay one time, and you leave. So I've gotten a lot more since then, because one guy called me and had me sign a bunch of postcards, and I got paid for that. And then I now have an agent for the, and you know him, 'cause that's how you got a hold of me.
Yep. Shout out to Scott Ray.
Yeah, and he's really a neat guy. And so now I've gone to England to sign, and that was really fun. And I'm going to be going to Vegas in August to sign. So it's just a new experience, and I just love meeting all these different interesting people.
Yeah, I'm glad you're into that experience because, we were talking earlier about kind of removing that barrier between you and the audience. And there's really, when you go to a convention and when you are a person who's at a convention, there is absolutely no barrier. You're just there face to face with that person.
Yeah, and I like reality. I like real. Um, you're on the set doing a movie, and you're interacting with the other actors, but with no audience. And even as a dancer up on stage, you're not really interacting with the audience, because you have these bright lights on you and you're performing and doing your thing, but you're not really interacting with the audience.
So, last thing about your episode of Star Trek, too, before we move on to a few other questions. This episode was, as we mentioned earlier, a backdoor pilot for what was meant to be Assignment Earth, the show that really never got off the ground. But I'm curious, I mean, were you supposed to actually be a part of that show? Did they film anything? Did you see any script? Do you remember anything at all from or anything for the future of that show?
No, didn't even have an idea that it was a pilot. Nobody told me. I mean, nobody. Larry told me. He said, it was supposed to be a pilot. You would have had a full-time job. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what's happened in my career. Things are not meant to be, I was on Laugh-In. And Laugh-In, they were talking to me about keeping me, as I was on it twice. And they were talking about keeping me as a regular on the show. Then they canceled the show. So it's kind of the same thing, it's so, no, I had no idea.
It's just funny how that stuff kind of works out, isn't it? How the universe just works. And it's always just about a completely random set of circumstances that can make or break a career.
Exactly.
So, I'd like to ask, we're talking about some of the TV and the film roles you've had. So, just kind of an overall question. What would you say would be the best day you ever had on a set, and what would be the worst day that you ever had on a set?
Oh gosh. I've really never had any big worst days. The worst for me was all the sitting around. You have to sit a lot. And then they call you on, and you have to all of a sudden get yourself all pumped up again to go on and do your thing. So really that's the worst part, but no worst days. The best, I just had so many incredible, wonderful experiences that I don't know that I could name one that's the best. I just found a lot of people were very kind and I've always had people be very kind and generous and good to me. So I've never really had anything bad. Well, one thing did happen one time that was bad. I was in a commercial for a company, and it was European, and they put me in a box with my legs around my neck, and they started swinging the box around, and then these two guys, I don't even know what the commercial was, they dropped me, and I was in the box when they dropped me, and it really hurt me. It hurt my back because my legs were, around my neck while they were doing this. And so this other gal that was on the set, she was so protective of me. She said, she is hurt. She's not going to get back in that box. The box fell apart, and they were trying to put the box back together. That was probably the worst thing that ever happened. And so I called Coralie. I called from the set. I said, it was before I didn't have a cell phone. I had to go out and use one of the phones that was the phone booth. And I called Coralie, and she said, you tell them you're done. You're done. And she said, we could sue them. I said, no, I'm not hurt that bad. No. So that was probably the worst thing that ever happened.
So I kind of asked you about this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to hear a little bit about what you're doing today, and more so, are you still maintaining that same flexibility that you had back when you were doing Star Trek? I mean, are you able to still keep that kind of stuff up? Can you still put your leg behind your head?
I can get it kind of. You have to realize I've had 2 hip replacements and I have a back implant.
Okay.
From doing contortion at trade shows for like 28 years.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, 18 years, not 28. So
a lot either way.
It's a lot. I can still, I don't know if you can see my leg. I can still sort of get it up. and I teach Pilates out of my home now. I am 80 years old.
You do not look it. I have to tell you, you do not look 80 years old.
Thank you.
That's not just pure flattery here. That is the absolute truth. I mean, I know your age because I looked up, Wikipedia and all that stuff, but seeing you, I mean, you do not look anywhere near that number.
Well, thank you. I am 80, so, and I've had the 2 hip replacements and the back implant. Can't forget the back implant. So and now what I do basically is I go ballroom dancing a couple times a week. I go ballroom dancing, and I teach several people a day I was teaching 6 hours a day, 6 days a week in my studio. I have a studio in my home with the reformers and the exo chair and all that. But I'm not teaching as much now. I teach 1 or 2 students a day is all, and only 5 days a week. So, and my granddaughter's here visiting right now, so I have my granddaughter here, and so I'm very busy. I have a very good group of lady friends. My husband unfortunately passed away in 2015 in December. So maybe 7 years or 6 years, this, whatever the math is, this December. So I'm now just doing my thing with my girlfriends.
And based on kind of what you've said during this interview, a lot of which was, that you really didn't like being on set, having to wait. You just kind of wanted to go. It sounds like, being active has been such a very important part of who you are and your lifestyle. And is that kind of maybe part of the reason why you still look this amazing at this age?
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I am active. I have to be active. It's like when I was working at the Sands as a Copa girl, we just walked around and we did like a little step ball change, kick, whatever. And that was it. So then I went to work with the Rudis acrobats at the Dunes in Vegas. We had to work 3 shows a night, and I only made $2 more a week. And we were working, I went down from 100 and probably I was 121. I went down to 98 pounds working for Rudis. My dress size went down to a 0. I got so skinny because it was like acrobats across the floor. We did a 20-minute can. While I was working there, I got water on my knees. And I thought, I'm pretty stupid that I'm working this hard for only $2 for, a week. But I learned from it. And there's a lot in life that we have to, as we get older, try to learn. Patience is one of mine because I want to do things right now. I'm active. As I said, my granddaughter went to a ballroom dance with me this morning. We went, and she went with me, and she's sitting on the chair yawning. I think I'm wearing my 7-year-old granddaughter out.
Oh, that's pretty amazing to say. I mean, yeah.
I'm wearing her out.
Like that sounds like something that'd be impossible to do. It's a 7-year-old girl. So I mean, yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Right.
So, I'm glad you kind of also brought up things that you're learning, especially now, even in this older age, because that's one of the questions I like to ask here on the show is, April, kind of looking at your life as a whole, what would you say would be the most important piece of advice that someone ever said to you, whether it would be about life or performing? Do you remember like one piece of advice that has stuck with you to this day that you always use and think about?
I use a lot of things, but as I said, I'm working on patience, and I think it's very important not to be judgmental. We're all individuals, and when we look at someone who, I grew up in an age where if you had a tattoo, you were really not a very good person. But I mean, that has nothing to do. One time I was on set and I worked with this guy. He had tattoos all over his face. He had them on his face. He was there because of that. He got the job because he had all these tattoos and rings. I mean, he had rings in his eyebrows, rings in, like these safety pins through his forehead. And I'm thinking, oh my God. At first I thought, oh my God, that guy, oh geez. But then I got to talking to him and I thought he was so smart. He had like 2 master's degrees and and I thought, you can't go by appearance. You can't go by what somebody looks like. You can't be judgmental. So that's been what, I pretty much am getting over that. I'm good at that. But because I'm always so active, I want to do everything now. I'm still working on patience, but my mother taught me one thing that if you lose something, it didn't fall off the end of the earth. You will find it. And if a situation looks bad, you look at the situation, it's a learning curve, you're going to learn from it, so it becomes a good experience. So really nothing is bad. And life is individual. We always experience things differently. You could have the same experience I had, and for you might get something else out of it than I get out.
We talk about at any age, learning to change. I mean, really learning to change and to be patient. It requires flexibility, and that is something that you do excel at. So, you're basically taking that physical aspect and now putting it to the mental aspect.
Right. My body was always very flexible. And so, as I said, you're right. The body is flexible. Now I have to as I'm maturing, I'm becoming more youthfully mature. I have to make my body flexible too.
That's a good lesson to learn.
And always learn. I'm always trying to take classes and learn. Right now I'm taking an art class, so.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
All right, so April, last thing today, and I feel like we've already kind of discussed this during this interview, but I'd love to hear, what is the best thing for you about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Well, actually, I'm enjoying it more today than I did the day that I did it, because I didn't realize how important Star Trek was, and I didn't understand really the whole philosophy of Star Trek. So I really was so naive and innocent mainly about knowing what it was about. I just went, had to put the costume on me, did the job, got my money, and left, which I'm sorry that I didn't really know at the time how wonderful it is.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to find you. I'm glad Larry did all that hard work and discovered it was you all along, and that you are now truly a part of the Star Trek family, which you should have been for so many years beforehand. So you're here now. That's what matters.
Right. A lot of life went by.
But we got you now, and we'll see you at more conventions, which is always great to hear. And I love hearing that you're loving that too.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, April, thank you again so much for chatting with us, telling us a little bit about your life, a little bit about your time on Star Trek, and also, again, shout out to Claude for joining us here today too. I'm glad we are cat approved on this episode.
You are. Is he still here?
He's still hanging out, yep. And we're now joined by special guest Claude on camera. There he is. Wow.
There's Claude.
So we got 2 black cats right now in this episode.
Right.
Well, April, thank you so much. It's been lovely. It's great to meet you, and hopefully we get to see you at a Star Trek convention sometime soon.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold, and thank you for checking it out. One more time, if you're not following us on social media, please do so by checking us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold, and that's all one word, no spaces, on any of those platforms. If you want to check out the video version of this podcast to see our guests, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where I post the video version of this show every Sunday after the initial episode airs on Thursdays. Shout out to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, who create 3D printed toys and prop replicas inspired by Star Trek. Their items come in all shapes and all sizes and are always amazing. If you're in a position to financially support Trek Untold, please consider heading over to patreon.com/trekuntold to become one of our Patreon supporters. There's a lot of cool perks that you can get by becoming a Patreon supporter, including early access to the episodes, the ability to ask our guests questions, and a lot more cool stuff coming very soon. Please consider leaving a rating and review on iTunes or any other audio platforms that you listen to the show on that allow you to do so. Or if you're one of our YouTube audience members, please make sure you comment on this video and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Special thanks to Scott Ray for providing us with this week's guest. If you'd like to book them for an autograph signing or convention appearance, email Scott at scottray67@aol.com. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the Rageworks Podcasting Network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.